Get off my car, please. It wouldn't do any good. It wasn't supposed to. Street fights have a format and rhythm to them. Most normal people think fights are about something. Some are, but most times guys who like to fight decide they're going to fight, they just need an excuse. Then there's the half-assed attempt to avoid violence, which doesn't fool anyone, but frees your conscience. Hey, I asked him nicely. There's even less reason for polite attempts at reconciliation when both parties want to fight, and I wanted it as bad as this guy did. There's a toxic chemical cocktail that gets stirred up when there's violence afoot. Sure, there's the same mine is bigger than yours that men have always enjoyed, but you can get that in sports or beating a guy at cards. It's purely garden variety testosterone. The feeling's like having a beer versus moonshine. A good fight builds up all those macho chemicals with a shot of "it's forbidden" and tosses in a dash of potential death or injury. The male mind, at least those of us on the Cro-Magnon end of the spectrum, come as close as we can to overdosing on the rush of cortisol, adrenaline, plus a giant shot of dopamine. And that's assuming you don't have a werewolf cheering you on.
To get going here, to have a conversation started, I am curious to know how the evolution of Johnny came to be in terms of, you really start, I mean, the really great thing about these books that I think is really amazing is how they start. I love how you just go right into the story and we're right there. Every single one of them starts with the incident that cites the rest of the book and going to shape the rest of the book. People always ask me, where to start. Start where the story begins, right? And you do that very, very well.
Well, gosh, thank you. Because the one thing, if you go to critique groups, the one thing they always do is they drag out Save the Cat.
Yeah.
And they beat you over the head with inciting incident until you forget what that even means anymore. But the big thing for me, and thank you for catching that, is, to me, this was written to be a pulp detective noir kind of thing, right? It was never meant to be an in-depth psychological study of a tortured young man. And so there are tropes and there are ways to do this stuff, right? Number one is open with a fight scene. So it kind of does that in all three, really.
Yeah.
But the big thing is, I just wanted it to be a fun roller coaster ride. And funnily enough, and this sounds really artistic, and I cringe every time I tell this story because it sounds like nonsense. The first book came about because I literally had a lucid dream about a Russian gangster fighting a werewolf. That's where it came from. That started the whole thing, was this thing in my head, this image, and then who's the werewolf? Oh, cool. The werewolf is the good guy in this, right? And that's what it came from. So it literally came to me in a dream, which I know sounds awful, but I have come to become a firm believer in lucid dreaming. You can catch yourself in that state where you're not quite asleep, not quite awake.
Yeah.
There's some really good stuff that comes to you.
I wouldn't fashion Johnny as Inspector Clouseau per se, but he does seem to stumble into messes every single time he gets involved in something, especially when it involves his benefactor and bringing that aspect of it in there. Do you feel like there's a certain, I don't know, je ne sais quoi to the aspect of him kind of just being involved in all of the garbage that helps him find who he is a little bit?
Well, I think that's exactly the point. If the book has kind of a redeeming social value, it's that the arc of the series starts with Johnny being kind of adrift. He's been told he's a loser his whole life. He believes it, and he's trying desperately to adult. And so he believes he's as stupid as everybody else does. And he's not stupid, he's just uninformed. I mean, the big thing with Johnny is that he doesn't believe in the paranormal and the occult and all that stuff. So he thinks he's the weirdest thing that's out there.
Yeah.
So he's kind of unarmed going into these situations, and he has to catch up in a hurry. And God love him, he manages to make lemonade out of lemons at least most of the time.
Let's give context to the character and the situations and everything
Sure.
like that. I mean, for Johnny, the interesting thing is his struggle with Shaggy, but he seems to, as more and more goes along throughout these 3 books, finding something different about his abilities and who he is. And that in turn is because of the people he's involved with. It seems like him finding this path was kind of a weird way of him kind of finding himself.
That's exactly right. And one thing that I'm really proud of in the series is people like the peripheral characters.
Yeah.
My daughter is exactly Johnny's age. Matter of fact, as I think about blue collar 30-year-old Chicago guys, I basically modeled him on the lunkheads that my daughter is dating. And one thing about kids that age, which is different than the likes of you and me growing up, is it's all about found family.
Mm-hmm.
And Johnny's family, I mean, he was a Romanian orphan adopted by this couple who never really understood him. And if the orphanage had had a return policy, they'd have probably used it.
Yeah.
So he was feeling very underappreciated and unloved and all this stuff. And he's collecting these people who, as weird and damaged, and they all have some connection to the paranormal world that he just doesn't have.
Sam's mama and grandson, but they're not really that connected to it. I mean,
Grandma knows people who know people. I'm fully convinced of that. Bill, like Johnny, is just in denial.
Yeah.
About the whole thing.
Yeah, true.
But Bill's got his own issues, right?
Yeah.
But I think it's that found family makes you stronger thing that Gen Z especially clings to.
One of the really great things about these books, and one of the things that I would say to people if they ask me, can I read The Last Witchfinder without reading Vegas and Anubis? And I would say yes. That's one of the great things about this, because each one of these is its own adventure, but without the context of what we were just talking about. Because really, in the very first book, he finds the majority of the found family that you're speaking of. But for the most part, you could jump into Witchfinder and be okay if you knew the context of
Well,
the
I'm
relationship.
really glad you said that, and I'm glad you found that. Because that's what I intended to do.
Yeah.
I didn't know at the beginning exactly how many books I was going to do. I knew it wasn't going to be a long series, but I knew that I have done this because I'm cheap and I buy a lot of 99 cents on Kindle, right? Yeah. Whatever happened. Oh, that looks cool. And then I find out it's book 4 of whatever. And there are a couple of things as a writer, and you know this, that it's a tightrope, right? You want to give them enough information that they're not lost.
Yeah.
But you also don't want to do 5 pages of explaining everything that went before.
Right.
Right. One of the things that drives me crazy, most writing advice I can take or leave, but one that is true is you want to avoid the "as you know, Bob."
Yeah.
Where they use stilted conversation to catch you up on all the stuff you need to know so the rest of the story makes sense.
I mean, in life, we walk into each other's lives at certain points. We don't walk in from the very beginning, right? And so we don't know context and history as much as the next person when you befriend somebody. But also, as you grow on, those people fade away and other people come into play. Was that kind of the idea of for the singular?
None of us comes with a user's manual.
Yeah.
It would be great if we did. It would solve a whole lot of problems. But the fact of the matter is that, Johnny has people. And it's funny because the found family is mostly in books 1 and 3, because in book 2, I took him out of what he knew and took him to a whole new city.
Right.
So there are a couple of characters from the Vegas book
and
that
you
make an
do use
appearance.
them to set up
Right.
the trip. So
Right. And they're crucial. I mean, I
yeah,
think bringing them back was important to finishing off
yeah.
the series. It's funny. I like I say, I have dropped in on a lot of series, and then I go back and go, oh, okay, this was fun. Let's,
Mhm,
let's read the rest of this, or let me at least pick up from here and keep going.
mhm.
And that's my hope with this. And I thought at 3 books, it's not too onerous. Like,
Yeah.
just get the rest of the series. It's not going to kill you. And George R. R. Martin has a lot to answer for, because I have been told by so many people, I was a little disappointed in the sales of Vegas Berserker.
Uh-huh.
And then somebody explained to me, no, the problem is nobody wants to get invested in a series and they don't know that it's going to end, or they don't know
Oh,
that the next book is coming.
yeah.
And so a lot of the marketing that I'm doing for this is, if you've been scarred by Game of Thrones, right? If you're tired of waiting around for that sucker to end, this is a whole series. Look, it's
Yeah.
done. I promise. You can read all 3 of them and you'll be fine.
The other thing that strikes me very interesting about this, that's unique to your series in particular, is oftentimes when you have a hero that has something that they're dealing with that's beyond them, right? Like, for Johnny is Shaggy and dealing with that aspect of it, right? But when they do that, it's oftentimes they're looking for the way out. They're looking for the reason to not be that anymore, do that anymore. But it never strikes Johnny to go that direction. And more, he starts to lead into it a lot more.
Well, he has, in book 2, he has an escape hatch.
Yeah.
There's a young woman that Johnny gets involved with in book 2, and I won't give away the whole connect, but she has experience with Johnny's problem, and she has created a potion that at least temporarily allows him to kind of expel
Yeah.
Shaggy. And when Johnny uses it, he kind of misses it. Like, that's a
Yeah.
piece of him that's missing.
Yeah.
And so one of the things, and I'm delighted that you're finding it and connecting with it, Joe, is that, if you could wave a magic wand and suddenly cure him, would he do it? And
Yeah.
I think Johnny believes, as so many of us do, that our flaws are what make us who we are. And
Yeah.
yes, you want to control the damage, and yes, you want to be a good person and all that.
Yeah.
But this is who he is, and
It also brings about the moral dilemma that he faces, because he wants to be a moral person, right? He has this internal struggle often in this series about, is this the right thing to do or not, right? And
and he does like punching people.
yeah,
He does enjoy that.
yeah. And I mean, and when he meets other claws for the first time, it kind of surprises him how violent
Yes.
that is, right? So,
Yeah,
but yeah,
exactly.
it's interesting because it's a human struggle within this paranormal, supernatural effect. And when you're shaping characters, when you're looking at characters like Johnny and stuff like that, and that you're going to have a lot of these characters repeat themselves in future books and things of that nature. Are you careful about how much internally? I mean, Johnny is the catalyst, so you're going to reveal stuff with Johnny all the time, and Johnny's going to grow, and he's
It's also written in first person, so
Right,
you're
right.
in Johnny's head the whole
right,
time.
exactly. But I mean, in terms of the aspect of being careful to sprinkle about, in the series,
Right.
were you conscious of that?
Yeah, I think it was. I am old. I could actually end the sentence there, but I was going to say is I am old enough to remember when you could turn on the TV and go, oh, I've never seen this show. And you would immediately know what the show's about. You would be able to watch it. And they didn't have this thread that ran through every episode designed to keep you watching. They just had that episode of the show. And Columbo was always going to be Columbo. And it's not like he got rid of the raincoat in the last episode, right?
Yeah.
Did what he did. And I liked that. This notion that now everything is designed to hook you for 8 episodes of streaming or umpteen seasons of the show. That's how you ruin good shows.
Yeah.
right? Because
Yeah.
all of a sudden the couple's been together for 2 years. Well, I guess we better introduce a baby now,
Yeah.
or
Or divorce
a
and more
divorce or
people.
something,
Yeah.
because they've got to keep it going. And
Yeah.
I just wanted people to be able to pick up the book. If you found the book in one of those little libraries and said, "Oh, this sounds cool," you would get it. And if it's the only one you read, you would leave satisfied. I would be hurt, but you would be satisfied. And if you decided, "Oh no, I got to find out what happens more," great. That's the idea, that you're intrigued enough to do that.
Mhm.
But the notion of each book being able to stand on its own is, I think, really important.
Mhm. We've talked about this on other shows before. We're born in Chicago. You lived in Chicago for a very long time, right?
Well, actually, I was born in Canada, bounced around the
Right.
continent, but spent 18 years in Chicago before
Exactly.
coming to Vegas.
You found yourself in Chicago.
Yeah,
Let's say
indeed.
that. And that this was kind of a love letter to that aspect of your life in a lot of respects. But I mean, you also go to London, you go to Las Vegas, all the you travel Johnny around a little bit, especially now where you're in Vegas. So the second book lends a lot to
Yes.
that. But I'm curious, did you feel like in the third book, when you go back there, was it a different experience for you than the first? Because the first book, you probably had a lot of what you wanted to say about Chicago in it, right?
Yeah.
And then the third book, you're going back because you're going back to him to reconnect with the people that he needs to reconnect with.
Well, without giving away one of the coolest / worst parts of the book, Chicago is the most rat-infested city in America.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I know exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah, it's funny. I sent my daughter the arc of the book,
Yeah.
and I knew when she'd gotten to that part because I got a one-word text that just went "ooh," which was mission accomplished. Right? I achieved what I set out to achieve. So there are things about Chicago. Chicago has its own culture. There are, and I love it. I really do like Chicago. If the weather did not suck so hard, I could quite happily have stayed. Man, it's so funny. This is making this sound like some heavy psychological study of a tortured young man. It's a werewolf story. There's stuff, right? But it's funny because if you're going to do that justice and make it something that people want to read, you need to ground it in something.
Yeah.
And for me, Chicago's sense of place and its sense of itself, right? How people in Chicago think of themselves is a really important part to understanding Johnny. So yeah, I'm very pleased with it. I mean, it becomes less important in the third book only because by now we get it.
Yeah.
Right? Like when he goes to Vegas, Johnny doesn't do well outside his native environment.
Yeah.
He gets in bar fights in Texas, and Caesar's Palace gives him a giant migraine just by being Caesar's Palace, and he doesn't really dig Vegas. That was intentionally written because I love Vegas. I love living here. I love it, and I get it. Right? When people say, "Oh, I don't like Vegas," or nice Midwestern folks come here and get kind of freaked out, I get it. And so when Johnny goes home, he's glad to be home, and he's with his people. But now he's seen the world. He's never going to be the same. And although he loves Chicago, maybe, and this is where the story ends, maybe he stays there. But we all grow up at some point. But I think the sense of place is really important if you're going to understand somebody.
The other thing about it is the people you've grounded there. The first book, obviously, they're very involved. And then the second book, they're a little bit involved. And third book, they're a little bit more involved. And I don't want to spoil what that journey is. But there is an aspect of that to this. And was that important to you too, to just not focus on Johnny for a little bit and to give these other characters, this found family, some light and some structure?
Yeah. I mean, some of that is just being a writer. You want to do a good job, right? And it's really easy to make secondary characters cardboard convenient cutouts.
Yeah.
right? Like Bill, who is Johnny's best friend, is gay and has a disability.
Yeah.
I could have stopped there,
Yeah.
right?
Right.
And okay, cool. So we can do some gay jokes and we can do some of this, and Bill comes in, enters scene one, says what he needs to say to move the plot forward, and leaves.
Right.
But Bill's got an arc, and Megan has an arc, and I think that just makes the story better. We care
Yeah.
more about people. It's just good writing.
Yeah.
And that's the thing, is I think you can find good writing in any genre. You can also find really terrible writing
Yeah.
in any genre.
Yeah. For sure.
And even though this is a silly werewolf PI story, I want it to be good. I want it to be good writing. And I think, hopefully, I've done that. And one sign that I did that, I did an experiment. I've never done this before. On the launch day, I did a Facebook Live and sent it out to my mailing list. And we didn't have a lot of people show up, but I had people from literally, I'm like Taylor Swift, right? From every era of my life. I had people. I literally had my first boss when I was 16
Oh, wow.
join, and people from Canada and New Zealand, and people from my stand-up days, and people from the Las Vegas Writers Group. And so that was great. And one of the things I did was I asked them, who's your favorite character?
Mm-hmm.
And I was stunned that everybody picked something else.
Mm.
Everybody had a different favorite character.
Mm-hmm.
And a couple of them, we love Francine Ball. Well, Nurse Ball is a badass, and you should love her. But I was surprised. Like, a bunch of people said Megan, and
Yeah.
I love Megan.
Yeah.
I don't know if she's going to be in the movie or not. There's a screenplay that exists for the first Johnny Lyon book, and as I was going through it with the producer, it was like, if we might need to lose a couple of scenes, and I know which scenes they are, and poor Megan may not make the cut, which apparently she's some people's favorite character, so keep her in, damn it.
Have you had inklings of taking some of these characters that you've created and spinning them off at all?
Absolutely. One of the characters in the second book existed before any of the books did.
Mm.
I write short stories as well,
Sure.
and I've had a few published. And the Anubis disc, which is the Macguffin in the first book, was actually something that I wrote for another story years before. Cool. And in the second book, I had written a story just after I moved to Vegas. I'd written a short story about a pawnbroker in Las Vegas who can read the items that are brought in, right? So he knows the story of the items. And so this character of Lem Collins had existed for a couple of years before I took Johnny to Vegas and went, well, he's got to run into Lem. Right? So a couple of these characters have had lives of their own. The third book, I actually have delusions. If they ever make a Netflix series of my books, it won't be the Johnny Lyon books. I think Casper Pack is a character that, by virtue of what he does, this is another one that came to me in a lucid dream. I was having a dream where I was given the money to produce a reboot of the series Kolchak the Night Stalker, but it had to star Randall Park. Which, first of all, I would totally watch that show.
Totally, yeah.
I think Randall Park is great. I think he'd be terrific. But this notion of the monster of the week and a reporter being the logical person to track this stuff down, and then it being a young Korean American guy and whose friends on the magazine are this very ethnically diverse, very messed up group of humans.
Sure.
But I think that would be a dynamite streaming series. So I think if anything kind of goes beyond this, unless I write another Johnny book, which isn't the plan, I think Casper may show up before anybody else.
I'm curious for you. This is you've mentioned this is it for this series, most likely, possibly.
Sort of, kind of.
Yeah. When you think about it now that you've had time to kind of look at it and think, what has Johnny given to you that you didn't expect from him?
I think it's done a few things. It has solidified my chops. I mean, it's told me I can write. This is as good as anything you'll find in the genre, and better than most, he says honestly. I can play in these leagues. I can do this. And I mean, for writers, imposter syndrome is just horrible and ugly and weird and and brutal.
Yeah.
So I think it's given me the confidence to do some of the things that we've talked about. I can flesh out secondary characters. I can plot kills me of all the stuff, right? Creating a coherent plot that connects A to B is not Wayne's strong suit. And I can do it when I have to. Right? I think what he's given me there in terms of emotional stuff, not much, because Johnny is going through the journey that I've gone through most of my life.
Yeah.
I was undereducated, pretty much constantly underestimated, and believed for good reason. It took me a long time to shake that and become comfortable in my own skin. And I think it's more like that's what I'm giving Johnny, is the ability, from what I know, to work through this. You'll be okay, kid. It gets better. Right? I want to do something before everybody scatters to the winds, because I don't want to take up too much of your time, and I can't tell you how grateful I am. I have a tradition. When a book or a story gets accepted, I do this. When I send in the last draft of the edits, I do it. And on pub day, I do this. There is a very particular brand of rye whiskey called Templeton whiskey. And this goes back to the first book, Count of the Sahara. But it's very important to me that when I celebrate writing accomplishments, I have a ritual. Now, I've kind of blown it because I haven't had the cigar today because I can't smoke in my office, but I can do this. And so I want to celebrate Johnny's emergence in this last book, probably goodbye, but I want to share this with all of you. And so I want to thank you, Skol, cheers, chin chin, your mama, whatever you want. Thank you so much for coming to this. Thank you for supporting it. Oh, there you are, my little friend. And thank you for supporting me and my work. And I will not get teary-eyed, but I mean the heck out of it. Thank you so much. I think there are a limited number of paranormal or weird supernatural creatures that Johnny would encounter in the course of his work.
Yeah, especially a skeptic who's really not a skeptic. Yeah.
Exactly. So it's like, I think you can go too crazy. And the more books you do, the crazier you have to go.
Of course, yeah.
Right? Like, even a couple of times in this one, I went, ooh, this is bullshit. By the time I got to the third demon, I was like, maybe that. Oh, look, there's a shark down there.
Yeah.
I had jumped the shark, and that was that.